Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Exchange podcast, From Concept to Reality, How to Deliver and Lead Successful Services. I'm your host, Ari Hirschberg, Director of Digital Community and Engagement at the Exchange Lab. Today, Kate Tarling joins me from the UK. Kate is all about improving services in big organizations. She helps leaders and teams create the right conditions through consulting and training. With experience in senior service roles and as the author of the book, The Service Organization, Kate shares practical insights as a speaker at top institutions worldwide. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks so much. It's a real pleasure to be talking to you today.
Me too. Over the last 5 to 10 years, you've worked with many different public sector organizations. Has your views of what needs to happen differently changed over the years?
It has in some ways. I think originally I assumed that it really needs individuals in an organization that really get how to bring people together with a vested interest for making services successful, and to have those people like alongside the teams that are actually doing the work to deliver services, and that together they take an approach that focuses on understanding users and meeting their needs, and doing those things together would go a really long way. I think that still holds true. I think what's changed is that we're getting clearer about what else you need in terms of the internal environment and preconditions to help everyone deliver better services. And I don't just mean like understanding the concept that some of this could work better, things like governance or leadership or reporting or budgeting or culture generally. I mean specific ways that an organization can take for granted that it should work that actually hinders good services, and then what are like practical interventions that can have a really big impact. And I think because some organizations have been on this journey now for sort of 7 or 8 years, they've really been able to learn what new roles come up to really help this work. What groups of people do you need to come together? How often should they meet? What should they look at? How do you transform operations to be able to make improvements weekly that are consistent across all of the other areas that involve contact centers, frontline staff, as well as digital teams? So all of those things together with really practical ideas, I think I've become clearer over time, and I think there's many organizations that have now been in that space, so there's plenty of places to learn from than there probably was when we started out doing this stuff.
Yeah, that's really exciting, going from just like beginner's mind to seeing the patterns of success.
Yeah, that's right.
Is it different in different organizations, or is this all common problems?
They are definitely common problems. I think each organization has probably got its own cultural patterns or dominant beliefs about how work gets done. So the journey to work through some of those patterns might be a bit different. I sometimes think about it as like the particular muscles that need to be exercised and developed over time might be different, but the themes, like the muscle groups, if you like, themselves are really similar across organizations. And I think, it's a really exciting time that we're sort of moving from just trying to establish one multidisciplinary team working in contemporary ways to bring sort of practical expertise and know-how to support how everybody works together, but not just operations, policy and digital, but the teams directly involved in service delivery too, and the role of corporate functions around them. So I think there really, really are kind of common areas that come up again and again in the public sector and even in the private sector. But I think the individuals and the teams, the behaviours that they need to practice and perhaps do differently can vary depending on what the organisation has been operating like.
Just coming back to it, like 6 or 7 years working in this, to see people have the aha moments must be quite joyful, and then to see it kind of ripple through the organization.
Yeah, that's really true. And I think for some people, and understandably, just talking about it in a theoretical way, like we're going to organize around services, we're going to improve services, we're going to work together, like we're going to do better at culture, like those things mean nothing until you are actually in the meeting where you suddenly see the power of having the exact right people in the room who don't just discuss what needs to happen, but can completely decide and then organize teams or do the work themselves to make it happen, that when they next meet 5 days later, a ton of stuff has been happened and resulted and people have learned stuff already. But that way of working, and when you see it, you start to get it. But if it's all just a bit of a talking shop or a bit of a sort of a leadership saying, we want to be better at services, but it doesn't really amount to anything, I think that's really hard for people to get their head around. Sort of different ways and different trajectories, I think, that people have the aha moment for really, really understandable reasons.
Yeah, I like how you said that. There is something pretty magical from going from words that people are like, okay, I've heard those words. I see them as words, but I don't see them as actions yet, to the place where people are actually in that space.
That's right. That's right. And for different people, sometimes it's helpful for some people to have the conceptual idea and the direction of travel. For others, it's nothing unless something has changed about what they're doing that day.
Yes. Okay, so then what's typically surprising to people about the work to create better services and better service organizations, or what wouldn't be obvious to folks at the start?
One thing that's true, and from my own experience working in-house in large organizations, is when you are on the inside and you've been there a while, it becomes harder to spot or to challenge the cultural patterns and behaviors that happen. So you probably have a window when you first join an organization, when you sort of see what's happening around you. But after a year or so, you start getting used to it, and then it gets harder. So I think surprising to people is probably the cultural and behavioral change this entails, which really is at the heart of it. And of course, you become part of that culture, so it's harder for you to spot or to catch yourself doing it, and I include myself in that. I think one other surprising thing is that some people think that change to sort of organize ourselves and organize the work around better services involves org structure changes, org design. So if you can get it down to an operating model on a slide that's approved by a committee, that means you are doing the work. And it isn't. Sometimes you might need to look at who you've got doing what and what capabilities you have in place, for sure. But sometimes you might need to actually just bring people together no matter how they're organized, and sharing a sense of the direction or the path that you're going to go on. But just talking about it or just having an idea in your head about what that might look like isn't the same as doing what's needed. So yeah, you can have almost any organization structure, but as long as you have the right people coming together, able to take action, working together as guardians of the whole, or sharing the same interest in making a success, you can have a really effective operation. And I think it's almost cliche now, but we saw some of these ways of working during the pandemic. And I think part of this is about trying to capitalize on that experience of people coming together to really focus on getting a service stood up or re-stood up if it had paused, and not to lose some of those really close ways of working. And so I think it's surprising to people, particularly when there's a culture where to make any change, you set up a working group, a committee or a board, rather than creating the real conditions and working practices. And I say that, it almost sounds like, well, it's not a profound change unless you're reorganizing, but the changes are profound. They're just not the sorts of changes people think that they are at first.
So in that, what's your thoughts of having leaders becoming almost like umbrellas, where they keep you safe to be able to really go for things and being that trust to build to be able to do those major changes?
I think that's absolutely critical. I think without that, you end up with individuals and people sort of ferreting around the sides, sort of setting up kind of skunk work type operations or doing their best, but that just takes so much longer to sort of really see the value of a sort of broader approach. I can think of where there have been most significant changes. It has involved very senior people able to either translate or face off between influence might be coming in a different direction from ministers or other parts of governments rather, or kind of different groups of people or other sort of stakeholders, having a senior person who can listen and understand all of the different influence, who can corral all of that noise, direction, some important, some perhaps less so, and translate that into either kind of good direction for teams working in these ways, or to actually push back and say, we don't know that yet. We don't know the best approach. The worst thing we could do is leap to a solution and then lock ourselves in. So I hear what you're saying, and we're not going to address that right now, but we are going to learn in these ways, and sort of creating the space then so that teams can do a bit of iteration. So yeah, I think it's really, really important.
Yeah. Thank you for the explanation on that. I like where it can go for building and creating a really strong organization that just gets a one straight line and gets the effectiveness of it in less time. Can you share your thoughts on governance? Why does it have a negative connotation in some organizations?
Yeah, it's an interesting word, and it can mean a lot of different things to different people. Sometimes when you're newer to working in a bureaucracy or a big institution, I think that word governance is often used as sort of a shorthand for everything to do with how hard it is to get work done, and including all of the difficult things about being in an organization, like how we don't always have the right discussions, how there are so many different kinds of work, whether we value the right kinds or not, disjointedness, the numbers of people involved in for even potentially small decisions, or how it isn't even clear about who you would go to about what, and so people try and work around what the process they see to save time. So all of that goes on, and I think sometimes we can bundle up all of the problems and call it, the problem is the governance, and what we mean is there are a lot of problems going on with how easy it is to get work done. And so I think some people see the need to push back against the governance, but what they really mean is challenging what can be some sort of dysfunctional ways of working that build up over time in any large organization. And I think when you join an organization, it's exactly the right time to be the most challenging of that. But those sorts of kind of collections of problems, and when that's turned into kind of complaints about governance and how bad it is, I think they can be really confusing for those people for whom governance is a natural and legal part of running an organization, where having, a main board, an exec committee, an investment committee, a health and safety committee, and so forth can be laid down by law and legislation. Like, you have to have those forums in place. But often it's like everything else which people are actually referring to. So I think to start with, just being clearer about what we're talking about when we talk about governance is a good starting point. Are we talking about the root causes of why it's hard to change or to achieve what we need to? Are we talking about some of the existing structures we've got in place? So perhaps we're not clear about what a design authority does, or what a technical authority actually is trying to stand for. Are we interested in the flow of work and ideas across an organization? Do we want to stop duplicative effort, or are we just frustrated by how much talking there is rather than decision making? Like, breaking down kind of what we're actually trying to tackle, or what we've noticed in our organizations, is a good start. I think I would say that good services need good governance, and it's not governance that's the issue per se, it's the issues with governance and related culture that get in the way of good service delivery. And so those are the problems to look at, and are really worth looking at. And I think we're getting better ideas about what good service governance looks like these days.
That's a great explanation of that, because governance is great. It makes big organizations hum. It's just how to work with them. And people understand that big organizations require that, and how's the best way to work with it.
Yeah, exactly. So you're not kind of anti-governance, you're anti-problems and issues, which probably everybody would agree on are not good. So then how do you find ways to work through those specific sets of problems? It's an entirely different take on governance, I suppose.
Yes. So if an organization wants to get better at service delivery, specifically in terms of some of the governance practices and processes around services, what can it do?
Good question. What could people do sort of this week or this month? Or I think spending like even just a short amount of time just to understand the current landscape with whoever you're working with. So getting to know how important decision making happens at the moment about services, or how it should happen. So what by that I mean sort of how services operate, how they change, technology decision making, policy ideas, like what are the structures and mechanisms or people involved. I've also seen somebody spend about 6 months trying to map all of the governance in a very large organization, and they still hadn't finished. I do not recommend doing that. But spending half a day pulling together what you know, show it to a few people, build on there, probably a good idea. And then I think everybody will sort of want to share some of the main issues with it. Does too much have to wait until a certain group meets every 3 months? Do teams involved in delivery and change have to wait for instructions that have been made by people high up who perhaps haven't had the time to properly be aware of the risks and the conditions on the ground and the need for flexibility, therefore? So I think working with folks to develop that shared view about what is the governance landscape, but also what some of the issues are and the opportunities to improve, that usually helps lots of different kinds of people. I think alongside that, sort of developing a view about what more supportive decision-making and practice looks like. So I think sometimes when people review governance, they just think in terms of investment spend levels. So what group is allowed to make decisions that are above this amount or below this amount? As if the only problem is about work getting pushed through, not how to make that work successful, whatever size it is. And in service delivery and improvement, there are loads of different decisions and options that need to be worked through and evidence. So what are these different types of decisions? And from there you get, what structures need to sit alongside teams, supporting them in doing great delivery work? So, teams usually need somewhere to escalate things to. They need support when it's not clear which options to choose from, or potentially when they've realised the decision could affect other areas. So you start to build up an idea of when a team might need governance around it, and then you can sort of look at your current set of structures and think, where would they go? What's missing? Or what should we actually get rid of? And I think if you are looking at kind of future models, there's a risk that you can try and perfect it in complete isolation. So coming back to our perfect view of governance on a slide deck, rather than do that, I think have some ideas, but start somewhere. So pick a relatively safe service area or team and start to challenge and do different decision making. You do this, you need that person, you bring them in and get permission to do that. But you learn an awful lot about what you've missed, what didn't work. And perhaps instead of new governance, you actually just needed a different role to do some sort of communications translation between teams. So yeah, governance alone won't solve organizational problems around good service delivery, but there is a way to kind of build up what does work by looking at the current landscape, looking at the problems, and then trying out different ways of working, sort of banking the knowledge and the learning as you go.
Yeah, but testing it small and seeing how it goes, and then kind of expanding it as you learn.
That's it, and that's how you make it safe. So you're not saying, here's a brand new, entirely different governance model for the whole organization. You're like, what will make us feel safe about trying this, so that if we have missed something, it won't go too far. We won't feel entirely uncomfortable about it. So that's the idea of starting somewhere, is to make it sort of safe and bounded, that you get a good test run at it, but you haven't inadvertently made something else much harder.
Thinking about that person who spent 6 months trying to figure out everything, I could feel my head trying to exploding, because it's just like you're just creating, but it's just too much.
Totally. Do you know, I was once walking through an office and I saw, I kid you not, a poster, like a piece of white paper about the size of a commercial billboard, and every single square inch was some sort of rectangle or process or arrow, just explaining the governance process for one program. And that is the reality of what some organizations get to. And if you're listening to this, and if you see that one of those around, you are not alone. But there are practical things we can do to actually to improve some of how this is working.
Yes, I want to see that. Sometimes we see leaders or project teams push forward a product or service that they might miss some important steps, such as taking time for user experience research. Any advice on this?
Yeah, we say sometimes. I think this happens a lot, and for really understandable reasons. So, you might have a policy idea that's come up and that it's suddenly got traction, and before you know it, it's become a thing. And then that thing is what's in people's minds that needs to happen. But any product or service idea, it's always got a context that it fits in. Something that product or service is supposed to help with or achieve. So articulating the logic behind the thing being pushed forward. So we believe that by building this thing, by doing this thing, something will happen. What is that? And just that simple exercise reinforces the idea that the outcome is not a given, it's based on a belief. Some things we can actually be more certain about. If we're building the same bridge for the 15th time, we might know something about how to build that bridge. But more often than not, particularly in the world of digital and the world of real people that do unexpected things, we won't know for sure. So just that task can kind of open up to kind of our kind of common sense. So, well, what will make us feel more certain about this? We think that by building this product, people will do this thing. What will make us more certain? Can we do some user research? Can we test some prototypes? Can we identify 3 different options and then do something to figure out which one of those 3 options is the most workable or the most cost effective? So almost taking the same approach as with governance, by starting small somewhere, small enough to actually to try the product or to run a service with some basic way with a very small number of people, you can sort of explore what's actually needed. So I think when a product or service is sort of being pushed forward like that, it doesn't need to take long, an hour of penning down with a few people. What are we thinking here? What's the context? What are we believing here? What are some quick things we could do to de-risk this as we go? And I think at the heart of this, unwittingly, teams can embark on a delivery approach that doesn't incorporate good risk management, that doesn't see the potential costs involved. And by delivery approach, I mean one delivery approach is you have an idea, you build it, you move on. That is a delivery approach. There are other approaches. And I think our job collectively, and also as part of good corporate governance, is to choose the right delivery approach for the situation. And whenever we're not 100% certain or confident of the results, that is to de-risk by testing, learning, iterating. I think one way people can push back is for those not familiar with those ways of working, it can feel like you're just trying to add in more tasks that sound like they're in the way of delivery of the thing. But the biggest risk of all is that the thing doesn't do what we need, it wastes time or money, or it has negative outcomes for people's lives, or it slows us down, or it fails to achieve policy intent in some way. So I think these practices are part of risk management and should be embedded as part of that delivery approach. I think having leaders and teams follow customers and users through a process and seeing firsthand for themselves the different ways in which it goes wrong, or the different ways in which you thought it was easy, but actually someone's got to call the contact center 50 times, or that can be really eye-opening. As well as there's lots of really good blog posts of teams sharing what they've done, what they tested, what they learned, that can be immediately helpful for teams too.
I keep thinking of the word beginner's mind when you said that the whole way through. It's just like, we think we know it, but just sit open and just, it's fresh. There's so many angles. You got to be in a beginner's mind to even start to play and want to play.
That's it. And you don't need to therefore spend years learning and not doing anything. You can do really quick cycles of learning. And whenever you've done that first cycle of learning, you are in such a better position to decide, okay, are we certain enough now we can just go for it? Or is there some other area we've uncovered that we wouldn't have seen had we not done that first cycle? So I think just getting started somewhere is massively helpful in assurance.
So we're reaching the end of our conversation. Any final thoughts from what we've spoke about?
I mean, I could talk about this all day, so we've got many, many thoughts. We're recording this, or we're speaking at the end of 2023, right? So there are lots of things I'm looking forward to in 2024. I think kind of building really good awareness and education at leadership levels around the teams doing this hard work is going to be really important. I think showing and celebrating what good looks like. Sometimes we get so focused on what could be better, we forget to look around at the really awesome stuff that is already going on in our organizations. The individuals from any team that instinctively are working in really brilliant ways, gathering evidence and so on. So I think getting senior folk to call out good examples of the work or the culture or behavior, whatever it is that they want to see more of, that positive reinforcement thing is really important, rather than sort of starting from a sort of negative approach. So those are just some. And I would say, like, it's not just sort of digital function. There are brilliant people always in operations, always in policy. So finding people in those different functions and sort of trying things together, co-writing a blog post together with someone who might not even be aware that there's a blog post to be written, or the fact that there are so many audiences around the world that are desperate to hear about what you've been up to and how you've done stuff, even if it didn't work, help them avoid the same issues. So yeah, and wherever you've had good experiences of how some of the aspects of working in the pandemic, obviously there were a lot of really, really hard things as well, but some of those ways of coming together to work as multidisciplinary teams on whatever you're doing, try and sort of hold on to those approaches. Many more, but I'll stop there for now.
Oh, no, thank you. I would have loved to hear longer. But yeah, the pandemic is terrible, but the connections people made and working so closely in a way that people had never done before, I'm blown away when we were deeply in it and still thinking about some of the great connections that were made through it and the speed.
Yeah, that's right. I think, ideally there are no more pandemics, but when something major comes up, a crisis, an important issue, it really accelerates and amplifies how people can ignore the particular function, the particular silo, the particular team they're a part of, jump out of it and lift out of it. And it's that principle that you can support whatever your organization structure is like with, okay, well, what meetings were we having? Who were the right people that could take actions at that time? Who was doing that role of communicating with everybody? What were our communications like? They were kind of fast, they were this. What are some of those practices that we can build on, bring back, do in other areas? I think those are all going to be really important.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Thank you, Kate, for taking the time to share your thoughts. To the listeners, I hope you enjoyed the episode From Concept to Reality, How to Deliver and Lead Successful Services. You can connect with me at ra.hirschberg@gov.bc.ca or click the link in the show notes. Thanks for listening.